Manchester United are the champions of Europe again.
Hello and welcome back to the One United podcast, and more specifically, welcome back to, I believe it's the third, maybe fourth episode of Trafford Tactics. I'm joined as ever by Henry. Henry, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm not bad. You?
Not bad at all. Not bad. Yeah, I mean, I could be better given the result yesterday, but yeah, not too bad. And we're also delighted to be joined yet again by Ryan Quinn, or at Quinn Tactics on Twitter. Ryan, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, thank you, James, Henry. How are you all?
Yeah, we're all good. All good. So we'll get straight into it. Obviously, the big game of last month in terms of, the size of the fixture came recently in United's 0-0 draw against Chelsea. Now, from a neutral point of view, that was probably a pretty boring game to sit and watch, but obviously we want to sit down and talk through tactics and show that it was actually an interesting battle between two pretty good managers. So, we'll start off straight away, Ryan. What was the thing that, from the first whistle, what was the main thing that really stood out for you in this game?
Well, it was another big game that ended in a draw for United this season. And although obviously United didn't come out of it with 3 points, much of that can be put down to the change in approach in big games. And it's quite ironic because it's a season obviously affected by COVID, and pressing numbers have dropped down a lot from last season. But the irony being that this game was kind of defined by both sides' commitment to pressing each other. United set up in a 4-2-3-1, as you'd expect, with Daniel James retaining a place on the right side and Marcus Rashford on the left, and Mason Greenwood up front, and also a return for Scott McTominay in midfield. And Chelsea, as they have done under Thomas Tuchel in his run of games so far against Wolves, Burnley, Southampton, they set up in a 3-4-2-1. And I think the game oversaw both sides kind of pressing each other high up the pitch from the outset. So United, when they were pressing in Chelsea's half, they kind of formed an overload and forced the ball into wide areas. And one example of that was the wide players, so James and Rashford, would tuck inside to press the wide centre-backs, and then the ball would be sent one way to a wing-back. So Callum Hudson-Odoi, for example, were then both the winger on that side, the forward and the fullback, Luke Shaw, would push up and press. And the whole entire shape that United had would shift the side the ball's onto. And I kind of think as well that James's movement would play into that, because he'd move from the right to the centre, and his movement, like pushing inside, would invite the ball to one side of the pitch. And sometimes that worked. Sometimes it got United winning the ball in midfield and higher up. Sometimes Chelsea could get out with it, get out of those situations, largely due to their press resistance in midfield. So if you have Kovacic, and then also being able to switch the play from one side to the other quite quickly. Chelsea themselves, they also press quite high in wide areas. A notable example being, for me, who's been their key player all season, Mason Mount. He was playing as an inside left with Ziyech on the other flank, on the other side. And Mount would go up against United's right back, Aaron Wan-Bissaka. And Mount's an excellent presser, and he tended to force giveaways on that side of the pitch, where he could then obviously try to kick off an attack on the left channel. And when Chelsea did really try to build up down that side, Mount was often marked by McTominay, but Mount's so good at finding pockets of space and receiving the ball in those spaces that it makes marking him quite hard for me, the way I see it. But I did think that otherwise, McTominay had a good game. I think his return was quite key. I think both sets of midfield, so Kante and Kovacic, Kante had a very good game, and McTominay and Fred were essential to both sides' defensive jobs. And I think both sides trying to play on the front foot by pressing high and then trying to combine quickly and then attack via the flanks set the tone for the first half. But if we're going to talk about how United attacked, as usual, there were some rotations. So you'd see Rashford move across to one side of the flank, to the other. But I think the most influential player in United's attack was Mason Greenwood. So obviously, following the Europa League games where Greenwood started up front, when you may have expected Rashford to. Greenwood started up front again, and I thought that Greenwood offers something that perhaps usual number 9 Anthony Martial doesn't, and that's like when Greenwood's quite mobile, and that he would drop into deeper spaces and then try to link with the midfield. And I thought that when United were attacking, Greenwood was quite key in combinations and trying to switch play. So also when Greenwood would drop, that meant that Fernandes could then push forward, and then James and Rashford could also move into the box as well. And I thought Greenwood's role, both when attacking and when pressing, was quite influential in the first half. Were there any key big chances of anything during the first half? I thought there was a penalty shout for when Hudson-Odoi apparently he could have handled the ball in the box. Nothing was given. Eventually, I think after a VAR decision, but there weren't many clear-cut chances in the first half. Chelsea were trying. I thought Chelsea tried to play a few long balls against United's press, but they didn't really amount to anything. I was honestly surprised by the inclusion of Giroud. Maybe that's more in hindsight than anything, but it was like Giroud's profile didn't really suit the way that the opposition were playing. So you maybe have a runner in behind. I think you said to me, James, that maybe Timo Werner could have been more suitable for that sort of encounter. He was playing. He eventually did come on, but I thought maybe one of Chelsea's other forwards might have been more suitable to the game than Giroud.
Do you think, Ryan? Do you think that's a lack of anticipation from Thomas Tuchel? He obviously didn't expect Man United to be in a situation where we come out and press. We usually just sit back in those games. So do you think in hindsight he would have changed that in the first place? Because I guess it's expectation that United were going to sit back and counter attack.
Possibly. I mean, United kind of press quite high. They do tend to press, but maybe not that intently. And I think Giroud's been a recurring choice in games under Tuchel. But it's every chance that if he could turn back the clock and rejig his starting 11, there's every possibility that he might have not played Giroud. I simply think that had Chelsea had a forward to really make runs in behind against United's high defensive line, then there would have maybe been more chances carved out from that. Because I only really remember maybe a handful, if that, of opportunities from crosses into the box from Chelsea that obviously Giroud would, more so benefit from. But no, he wasn't as key in the game as maybe they would have hoped. But also, I think Chelsea had one good chance actually in the first half, and that was when United tried to press Chelsea in the wide areas on the left side. They were able to kind of evade the press, and then Mount switched the ball to the right side to Hudson-Odoi, and Hudson-Odoi was able to dribble into space, and he had Azpilicueta making an overlap ahead of him. But Hudson-Odoi decided to shoot, and he shot just wide. But it's kind of a reason why I kind of like Hudson-Odoi at wingback, if we're just going to digress for a moment, because he played there against Burnley, and I was really impressed because he keeps width well. He offers a diagonal switch. He can link with the centre back and the inside forward, and he offers good decision making. And it kind of links to how United's defensive line worked. I thought at times Luke Shaw took up quite a narrow position when defending in United's half, and that often meant that Hudson-Odoi was quite free on the right flank, but he wasn't always picked out, and that kind of surprised me going into things. I thought as a result, Chelsea both sides actually attacked mostly down their left flanks. I thought Chelsea threatened more so down their left flank, and I thought that was because of Ben Chilwell. So obviously you had Mason Mount causing kind of some issues. And Dan James on the United's right did track back and support Wan-Bissaka, but I thought Ben Chilwell was constantly making movement down the left. and as the game as the game kicked off in the second half, there was one chance early on where Mount and Chilwell combined, and then Chilwell played the ball into the box, and it met Ziyech in the box, and his shot was blocked quite well. I think it was a Lindelof block. I could be wrong, but I'm sure it was Lindelof, who had a good game as well. And it was just a good move down the left from them. And I thought also both sides had some chances going to the second half. I thought Greenwood and McTominay had some chances, and then McTominay had that run down the right side where it was a really good run down the right, but his choice of pass was lacking, if I may say. I think there were two runners into the box, but he didn't try and almost hit and hope, and hopefully he'd find a run into the box. It just I think he tried to cut the ball back, and I thought like the result itself wasn't as bad as it could have been, given the defeats given that Leicester lost, and I mean, I thought, as I said earlier, United obviously haven't had as many chances to counter in these sorts of games. You could say that maybe it's a good thing that Solskjaer's trying to move away from that and try and play more games on the front foot. And maybe there's more variation to how United play in big games. There's not just that reliance on one tactic above all other ways to set up and play against bigger teams. But maybe if you weren't really getting anywhere with creating in the way you were playing, maybe switching things up in the second half could have been worth it. Because both sides were cancelling each other out for me, and I thought that United maybe dropped the defensive line a bit deeper, and then maybe had more space to counter. Maybe invite Chelsea forward and then attack space. Maybe could have been more from it. But I mean, there isn't. I mean, going into but prior to the Palace game, I would have not been too aggravated if I was. I mean, if I can speak for all United fans for like a moment, I wouldn't have been too aggravated about the result. But I thought that a 0-0 draw in that sort of game isn't the end of the world. Isn't the end of the world.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I'll just go back to sort of how the team set up then, because obviously the United picked their usual 4-2-3-1 formation, and Chelsea have been very successful with this 3-4-3 that they set out with now. Did you make any notes on sort of how the two cancelled out and how we managed to get around potential overloads in certain areas?
Well, I thought United's 4-2-3-1 kind of worked well against Chelsea's 3-4-3 or 3-4-2-1, and that when Chelsea tried to build up, there was kind of like a mix in how United pressed. So you had like the attackers like pressing the centre backs, but you also had like McTominay was key to marking Mount, and then you had say Fred marking Ziyech, and then you had like Bruno Fernandes like floating about and either pressing the midfield or supporting the front line. And I thought like because United's shape kind of enabled the mixture of man marking and pressing space. So I thought that was one way. I thought Chelsea's shape kind of worked. I think the reason United were able to press the way they did as well was because obviously where Mount and Ziyech, they were inside forwards, they weren't wingers, and they were being marked. Obviously the way Chelsea built up meant they could beat that press sometimes. I thought that the way that Chelsea was set up with a lack of numbers in the wide areas, so they only really had the wing backs, United were able to force the ball wide and then press that wing back who was in possession. So yeah, I thought that United's formation. In watching the game, watching clips back, and given hindsight, I was glad that they went with a 4-2-3-1 usual go-to formation for Solskjaer rather than maybe a back three or a diamond that's been used other times. It's been used in other games on the occasion, or where the back three's been used in big games last season and in the Champions League this season, like against PSG. So yeah, I was glad that the 4-2-3-1 was used.
Yeah, definitely. And just, it might be something we've slightly touched on, but the obvious fact of playing Giroud up front and not having that electric pace in that Chelsea front line obviously meant that we could bring our line forward. Now, do you think that the front line that Chelsea put out very much dictated the way we played? Because you see against other teams that are on paper, going to take the game to us, we tend to sit back. Our pressing isn't that intense, but it was a completely different United side, especially defensively against Chelsea. So do you think that played a big factor, or do you think this was probably something that Ole had planned to do well in advance?
I think it was something that was probably planned. I think it's. I mean, obviously, I can't read the mind of Solskjaer, obviously, but to me, it seemed very much planned. I think, like, regardless of whether Giroud was starting or whether Abraham or Werner were starting, I think United would have played the same way. Maybe it would have been less effective had another forward played, but I think that they would have played that way regardless. The United's high line, United's centre back, United's defensive line playing high isn't unusual. Maybe unusual for a game like this, but it's not unusual. But I think had Giroud not started and had it been maybe a Werner or a Tammy Abraham, it would have been a bit different because Giroud's not a mobile centre forward. He likes to receive. He's good for knockdowns. He's good in the box, but he's not the kind of centre forward that's really going to test a high defensive line. You might say Werner could have started, but you would say at the same time that Werner's maybe more effective, maybe playing that inside left role, which that's the thing. Under Tuchel, Werner's played more as an inside left rather than the centre forward. So that's maybe why that Werner didn't start. And you had the front line of Mount, Werner, Giroud and Ziyech. But I do think there's room to argue that had Werner started up front, they would have really been able to test United's defensive line. Maybe had Werner started, Solskjaer's seemingly what was a plan going into the game would have been responded to with a change. He might have been forced to change and maybe drop the defensive line a bit. But no, I think United's defensive line playing high wasn't really countered well by Giroud playing, and the defensive line kind of helped United press high. You could move the whole shape higher up the pitch and then try and close Chelsea's build up down. So I think Chelsea set up and United set up, as well as cancelling each other out, they kind of benefited off each other in a way. So yeah, I think I wasn't surprised Giroud started. But maybe it was the wrong choice in hindsight. But
yeah, go on. Sorry. No. Sorry. Oh, it's all right. Finish your point. I was just going to sort of add on the end of it.
I was going to say that, of course, there's room to argue that Werner could have played up front. Maybe Abraham. I'm not too sure if Abraham would have started. But. Yeah, Werner's mostly played as an inside left. I think that's closer to what he was like for Leipzig. He didn't really play as the main centre forward for Leipzig. That was more Yusuf Poulsen. Yeah, I think a lot of what we're saying here about Giroud and Werner is much said in hindsight. But there's room to argue that there could have been maybe a different option up front for Chelsea on the day.
Yeah, well, I was going to add the fact of Werner possibly playing that inside left position, because on sort of the stuff I've watched and the stuff I've read on the game, the fact that Mount and Ziyech didn't possess this real high pace meant that McTominay could track them easily, and it allowed Wan-Bissaka to push up high onto Marcos Alonso without worrying about that spacing behind him. So, even if he didn't play up front, do you think that Timo Werner probably could have been utilised in this game had Tuchel given him a chance? Because there was definitely spacing behind Maguire, and there's absolutely no chance that McTominay is going to be able to keep up with Werner.
That's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, Mount. I think Mount had to play. I think Mount's Chelsea's key player, but Mount, as well as playing on the left, has played as an inside right. Funnily enough, against Burnley, Tuchel started Mount as the inside right with Hudson-Odoi as the wing back, and they both combined really well on that side. So had he started Mount and then on the right instead, maybe to go up against Shaw, and then have Werner against Wan-Bissaka, with Werner making those diagonal runs from that side, and maybe meaning that Alonso would have more room to make runs forward and then not be pressed by Wan-Bissaka, and then Wan-Bissaka having to retreat and cover the space that Werner would want to move into. Then, yeah, that could have been an equally interesting battle on that side. And it would have caused issues for United's defensive line, because with Wan-Bissaka dropping, probably this possibility that the entire line would drop. So yeah, it's quite, and then Chelsea could push forward their attack. So yeah, it's quite interesting. It's quite possible that really could have been the way forward for that game. Not resting, not playing Giroud, but having both Werner and Giroud, and then having Mount on the right side. That could have worked, or maybe even Werner on the right. Against Shaw, who was defending quite narrowly. So yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe not Ziyech playing. I don't think Ziyech has as much impact on the game as Mount did, either on or off the ball. So yeah, that's a good counterpoint. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I'll hand it over to Henry in case he's got any more questions on the game.
Yeah, the one thing that I wanted to kind of, I guess, elaborate on is the midfield battle between Fred, Kante, Kovacic, and McTominay. Do you think one of the managers in the second half could have taken a little bit more of a gamble in respect to the midfield, because it was quite clear they were just cancelling each other out? Do you think both managers were in that kind of situation happy with a point towards the last 20 minutes of the game?
Kind of did seem that way. I remember Fred. There was one situation where Fred was on the yellow, and he couldn't make the foul against Mount. I think he went. It was like he went to, but then kind of like retreated because he's obviously on the yellow card, and then Mount was able to like advance into the box. Eventually, was closed down by McTominay. But it's like, if Fred's in a situation where he's on the yellow, could he have been taken off for another attacker? Possibly. I don't think Chelsea would have made much changes in midfield. I thought Kovacic was really key to Chelsea getting out of United's press when they did, and moving the ball forward. And I thought Kante was Chelsea's best player alongside Mount. Yeah, I thought if either team was going to make the gamble and maybe take a midfielder off for another attacker, and maybe go for the kill and try and win the game late on, would have been United. But it did seem like as the game neared, stoppage time, that they were just going to try and play up for a draw, because there weren't many chances as the game. There weren't too many chances as the game wore on. But yeah, you could very much say that a 0-0 draw was a very fair result. Maybe if United got that penalty, it would have been maybe. I think otherwise, yeah, I thought the draw was very fair.
Fair enough. Henry, you got anything else?
No, that's it from me.
Well, I don't know if you have any other comments to make on the game, Ryan, before we move on to obviously looking ahead. So if you do, I'll leave the floor open for you.
Not necessarily. I don't really know. I've said what I've wanted to say on the game. Just maybe. I would have said prior to the Palace game that it wasn't. I saw a lot of kind of overreaction on social media when I thought really that it was a decent display and a decent point, and not as bad given that, again, as I've said, Leicester lost against Arsenal, so United, it wasn't as if Leicester went above United. So maybe in that sense United could have counted themselves lucky, but I thought that I thought all things considered, it wasn't really worth complaining about.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, we'll move on to, obviously, we'll briefly cover the last night's 0-0 draw with Crystal Palace. And one common theme that we've seen sort of on Twitter, and I don't know if it's something you've particularly picked up on, it's the lack of creation from midfield was a big problem in both games, seemingly. You know, we didn't really have that real, what would you call it, distributional dominance in that midfield. And, you know, was this something that you picked up on? And is it a case of we really are missing Pogba that badly?
Frankly, yes. I think Pogba brings something that United's other midfielders, for the most part, they don't have. It's not really a part of their game. I think United haven't really fared too well against Palace in recent seasons. I was going into the game not entirely confident. I really liked the lineup. I did like the lineup going into the game, but I was thinking to myself, it's not going to be straightforward. I was reading an article in The Athletic this morning about Fernandes being leggy, which I really do feel he is. I mean, of course, the team has strengthened since last season. It has got better. I do think United are a better team than they were a year ago, and especially before Fernandes being signed. But it's still as if United are overly reliant on Fernandes, and then because of that, they can't drop him. They just can't afford to drop him. And it does seem a lot of the time, like if you take the game against West Ham in the FA Cup, Van der Beek started, and I was really glad that Van der Beek did start. And Van der Beek's great at retaining possession, but in that game he kind of struggled to really influence things. He's not the same number 10 as Fernandes. He's a different number 10. He's not the sort of number 10 that's going to play the risky pass. He might want to make a run into the box and keep things sleek and clean. But Fernandes is the sort of player that United can't afford to drop, but maybe they need to in a way, because he is leggy. And I think as well, I think sometimes there's kind of an issue where United, I did kind of notice it when I saw bits in the game yesterday, where you get attackers in the box making some really good movement, but it's just not utilised. Or there's also cases where United have numbers in the box, but they don't make enough movement. It's a bit weird. It's a funny situation for United when they're attacking from the flanks at times. It's not every game, but it does pop up enough to be a bit of a concern, like against West Brom in that game a couple of weeks back. But yeah, I think it's one of those games where you simply have to look at it, move on, and then, because obviously on Sunday there's an even bigger game against Manchester City, who are becoming further and further apart from the rest of the pack in the table.
Yeah, definitely. No, one thing I will say before I hand over to Henry is, the fans got their wish granted in Eric Bailly returning to the lineup. Obviously, there's apparently a problem with Victor Lindelof, but you look at his pass map after the game. It was something that was highlighted on social media. To say he was a centre back, a lot of his passes were backwards and sideways, and he lacks that real cutting edge with progressive passes. Now, do you think this has highlighted sort of the limitations in Eric Bailly's game and sort of the reason why Ole Gunnar Solskjaer prefers Victor Lindelof in these sort of games?
Yeah, it's no surprise that Lindelof is preferred. I think Bailly is, for me, better in the air than Lindelof. And although the pass map yesterday suggested that much of Bailly's passes weren't necessarily testing the Palace's shape or bringing attackers into play, but I don't think he's entirely useless on the ball, not at all. But I think Lindelof is United's best distributor of all United centre backs. I think that I've often had discussions with people, and you can kind of compare United's three main centre backs, obviously Lindelof, Maguire, and Bailly, and you have a really good ball carrier and someone who's good in the air, but not necessarily quick in Maguire. You have somebody who's a good distributor and someone who can carry the ball well in Lindelof, but Lindelof's not necessarily good in the air, and sometimes can be defeated in aerial duels, especially from set pieces and like deliveries into the box. And then you have somebody like Bailly who's quick, good in the air, maybe prone to errors more so than the other two. So United centre backs all have major pros, but all have like a fatal flaw at the same time. So I think Gary Neville made an interesting point as well, where they're good centre backs, but they just don't match each other. They just don't bode well together at times as well. So I mean, it's hard to tell. I mean, because obviously there's going to be constant debate until the end of the season what United's best centre back pairing is. I think United have been linked with God knows how many centre backs now as well. I think there's been major links with Rafael Varane yet again. I don't know how true those rumours are, but and also Koundé from Sevilla, who was great against United last season in the Europa League. So I mean, I like the range of centre backs United have. I do think another centre back would be worth bringing in, but there's reasons to say that Bailly is worth playing alongside Maguire. There's reasons to why you'd prefer Lindelof. I mean, obviously, of the three, I think Maguire is United's best centre back overall, and I do think that Maguire is the first choice of three on the left side. But I mean, I get why people debate it, because they both have pros and cons. So yeah. Well, but just, I mean, if I had, sorry.
Go on. Sorry, I'll let you finish.
If I had to pick one of them, I'd pick Lindelof. I'd pick Lindelof over Bailly.
Well, just one more quick thing before I hand over to Henry. Then you mentioned the defensive.
I was just saying that I would prefer if I had to pick.
Sorry, I was just saying. You know, we talk about these players that United are targeting. Is there one from a tactical viewpoint that you prefer between Koundé and Varane?
Possibly Koundé. I think he's more highly sought after at this moment in time, which may suggest that Varane might be the easier option to buy. But I really like. I think Koundé is really good in either box, like attacking from set pieces. That United haven't, like. So you have, say, Maguire, who's good from that sort of situation as well. But United haven't really scored as many goals from set pieces as they could have this season, I feel. And I think Koundé is good in either box. I think that's what I really like about Koundé more than anything. A lot of people online that I converse with really rate Koundé. Perhaps watch him more than I do. I've only really seen him in European competition. I admittedly haven't seen as much of him in the La Liga. But I really like how he's dominant in both boxes. Above all things.
Fair enough. I'll hand over to Henry then.
Right. Here is. I'm just going to mention something about last night first, because I know we won't cover it probably in the next podcast. How do I say this without sounding a bit ridiculous? I personally, at the moment, I don't give a shit about the tactical stuff last night. I'm absolutely furious, and I know you are as well, James. I'm absolutely livid with last night, and it doesn't come down to the tactical stuff. It comes down to effort again. Why can't we put in, why can't we put in 100% into these games? I keep mentioning kind of names, and we'll elaborate on them, I'm sure, in a few minutes. I keep mentioning names. Rashford, awful again last night. Fernandes kind of drifted throughout the game. Greenwood, meh, bit poor. I thought Fred's passing was awful. I thought Maguire's passing was awful. I thought Matic was too slow. There were so many, recurring factors in that game that I thought were causing us so many problems. So, yeah, I'm absolutely furious about last night. As many Manchester United fans, I'm sure, are, because I saw the reaction on Twitter last night, and it was all, Ollie out again, as it always is whenever we draw or lose a game against a mid-table side. So, yeah, James, I want to know what your thoughts on that game first.
It's just one of those days, isn't it? I think we're having one of those weeks. Performances aren't up to scratch. There's tired legs out there, but one positive I did take from it was nice to see Mason Greenwood have 2 shots of genuine quality, because it was a real threat last season, and we haven't seen it that much this season. But there was 2 efforts that he had that were narrowly either wide or over the crossbar, and that was really nice to see. It's nice to know that he's not lost that finisher's instinct, and if we can get the ball to his feet, he will start scoring again. So that was a positive. But yeah, like you said, it wasn't an acceptable performance, but I'm sort of over it. I mean, it's done now. We're still second place. I know it's a bit of a Glazer puppet thing to say, but we're still in second place. We might come to regret it, given that we're going to probably get sucked into a top 4 race rather than just securing second place while we still can. But given the context and who's actually around us, this Leicester team is getting weaker and weaker by the day with the injuries they're having. West Ham side, a good side by all estimates, but history will tell you that these sort of sides in these European races tend to fall off towards the end. And then you've got Chelsea, who we've currently got 6 points, 7 points over, given it depends what they do tonight. But it's really not the end of the world in my eyes. There's big holes there. I mean, if we're still playing like this when Pogba comes back, I'll be very, very worried. But, it's not as big of a deal as a lot of United fans think it is, personally.
I'd be inclined to agree. I mean, it's obviously a very disappointing display and a very disappointing result, but I think much of it is played down to the amount of football that's having to be played at the moment. It's just the way this season has been. I mean, maybe it's a bit of a stretch, but given how intense United were on the weekend, maybe it was a bit hard to kind of match that midweek. And then, given that they play City on Sunday, it's a lot of games in a short space of time, and there's going to be legginess. You kind of want to see Fernandes rested, but you can't afford to, really. I think the same can be said for players like Rashford now too. And I would agree. Greenwood. I liked how he had some shots. Like as James said, he obviously hasn't scored as many goals as last season. I think he scored 17 last season. I think he's got 4 this season, so far. But I personally see him through the centre in the long term, not on the right side, which is why I really would like to see United sign a right-sided player in the summer. Or maybe try and play Diallo more often. But I like how Greenwood's able to open up shots for himself in the box. But yeah, I mean, much like James said, I don't see it as the end of the world, especially given that United are still second. I know that's a bit of, it's one of those things where you say it maybe to just, mask over paper over the cracks, maybe. But I think you have to look at the bigger picture, and notice that Leicester Barnes had an injury to his ACL against Arsenal, which is he's going to be out for a while, which is it's a shame, because it's not nice to see players suffer those kind of injuries, and West Ham, are they a product of this season? That makes sense. I mean, West Ham are obviously, they've been very good this season, and I like the way they do set up under David Moyes this season, and they've got some. I really like Antonio up front, but will they be able to replicate this last season? I'm not too sure. I'm not sure if they'll be able to do this next season, when maybe pressing numbers will go up, when maybe teams will kind of return to normality. Liverpool are still a bit far behind. Chelsea, I mean, this game could be quite important. I mean, Chelsea play Liverpool tonight. Can Liverpool afford to lose? Even if they want top four, can they afford to lose? Possibly not. Maybe that's a bit of a stretch again, but that's a big game for both sides. So yeah, I mean, it's not entirely the end of days for United this season. And a result against City is even more important than it was now. But no, I wouldn't get too carried away. No, not just yet.
Fair enough. Henry, you got anything else to add before we just quickly look at the City game?
No, that's all from me on that. Sorry about that little outburst.
Right.
It
Needed
had to
saying.
be done, man. I'm not happy. Just can't be happy with this.
Well, we'll move forward to the City game then, Ryan. Obviously, 3-0 draws in a row now, and we're coming up against one of the best defences in the world statistically this season. So just to start off with, how do you think United need to set up, given the personnel that will be available? Obviously, Pogba isn't going to be fit. It's looking unlikely that Van der Beek will. Cavani's still coming back to fitness. McTominay may be available. So how do you want to see United set up?
That's a good question. I wouldn't drift away from the 4-2-3-1. I wouldn't switch to a back three for this game. I wouldn't take any major risks. I would like to see McTominay play. I wouldn't. I mean, I go back to the game early, the reverse game earlier in the season when it was a draw, and City were more. They were passive in that game, and they weren't as intent off the ball. They simply weren't as they weren't what you would have expected them to be against United in that game. But I think the City have changed a lot. I mean, over December, January period, and up until now into March, they've been nothing but sensational. And I expect them to really take the game to United this time around. I expected that in the reverse game as well, but I really expect that now. And I don't really expect United to be able to match City for intensity off the ball and for. I don't think they can afford to give City space. Maybe in certain, by pressing high and then leaving a bit of space in midfield. And no, I think City are too good on the ball, and they rotate far too much to even try marking them either. So no, I think United should sit deep and should counter, but I wouldn't switch the formation up, and I really wouldn't switch personnel up too much either. I'd start James. I'd start Rashford. Although I think he needs a rest, I would start Fernandes. I think the big one for me is who starts up front. Would you start Greenwood up front again? Would you start Martial? Cavani's returning to fitness. Would it be worth starting Cavani? It's an interesting one who starts up front for me, but I wouldn't switch the personnel up too much otherwise. Very much close to the team that played against Chelsea, but I wouldn't press as intensely. I'd drop off, play a bit deeper, and try and counter against them. That's the tried and tested method against City that's really paid off for me. But yeah, I remember United pressing quite high against City in the reverse game, and that kind of been effective. But again, I think that was a 0-0 draw as well. It wasn't a game that it wasn't the most memorable of games, but it was a game that really kind of surprised me in how both sides did set up. But I expected a completely different game this time around. So in which case, United to drop deep. Maybe would it be worth having an extra man in midfield?
I was gonna say offering. Why not offer a suggestion in terms of formation? Why not play split strikers like we did when Solskjaer first came in? Because we need to pack that midfield as much as we can. So I can see Matic, Fred, and McTominay all starting in that game, and then Fernandes and Rashford and James as a duo of split strikers for when we counter attack. Would that be a two out of the box suggestion for United?
No. It's something that could potentially be viable. It's happened before. United have played it in games. I remember against Liverpool when James and Rashford were split strikers. Last season, that was last season. But it's not that I wouldn't play it. I don't really see it. I mean, that's why I said United shouldn't really change from the 4-2-3-1. Not just because I think it's the best form. It's maybe the most suited to the game, but maybe because I don't really see it changing too much. I wouldn't switch to a back three for this game. I just wouldn't. But I would. I'd keep to it. I mean, you could play a diamond, but City attack so well by the flanks. So can you afford to leave that space out wide? United would really need to be energetic to play a diamond, I feel. I mean, if you take the games where United have really paid off of a diamond against Southampton and Leipzig in the Champions League, for example, it was really intense. And I don't know if United can match that now, given how leggy players have been. I don't know if that can happen. But I mean, it's an idea, because I think James and Rashford would really be effective in that sort of setup. But I think. I mean, it's something to consider. I mean, because I think like maybe would it be worth playing an extra number in midfield against, say, Cancelo, who tends to tuck in, as Gundogan might push up. I mean, Cancelo's been amazing this season for so many different reasons. But
James,
sorry.
It's
something to consider. Do you play?
Sorry, James will know why I've suggested that, and James, if we do that in this game and come back to this and we've won like 1-0 or something on the counter attack, you know why I've suggested split strikers, because you can cut this out if you want, but in a certain other episode I suggested it and kind of got laughed at for it. So, but I think it's with us, we're so effective on the counter attack. If you can have one more body in midfield and you can win the ball in, say, you mentioned Cancelo there. He's a massive problem if we can't kind of put enough bodies in there and sort him out. So, if we put one extra body in there and then counter attack playing off Fernandes, who can kind of push into a further forward role and play off him with James and Rashford, then we could cause City a few problems. But 4-2-3-1, I think he'll go more defensive because it's too risky. If we can't press City because they'll rip us apart. So this game could end 1-0 to United, or it could end 5-0 to City. We're in a sort of bad, but also in a little bit of a luxury position in the sense that we don't know what we're going to get from United. We could get a really world-class performance, and Rashford, Fernandes, and Co could all turn up in this one game. But we could also have a stinker and lose 5-0. We just don't know. So that's the beauty of United at the moment.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I know we're getting a bit tight for time now, Ryan. So I'll ask you just one more question before I sort of open the floor up. Now, obviously, we're unsure whether Lindelof will be fit, but given the performances of the respective centre backs this season in different types of games, who do you want to see as a centre-back pairing? Because I think that'll be very important on Sunday.
Oh, I think may it be more safe to play Bailly if Lindelof might not be fully fit. I think Maguire has to start. I just think he's United's best centre-back. I mean, obviously he gets a lot of slack for maybe his lack of pace, but I think he's United's best centre-back, and he's the captain. He's going to play. rarely misses a game. But there's reasons to play both in this game. I mean, I think Bailly's more dominant in the box, and he's quicker. And yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, Lindelof's a really good reader of the game, and he covers well. But I mean, you could flip a coin. I think really for this game, if without going into too much detail, you could basically flip a coin, and then decide heads or tails, Lindelof or Bailly. Honestly, I wouldn't separate them too much for this game. I think because I don't see United. I
think we may have lost you a little bit there.
Think so. Possibly.
Well, while we try and get him back, then Henry, who do you want to see as a centre back partnership?
Oh God, I struggle with this now because Bailly had an absolute stinker last night, really, didn't he? He was good in the air and good at challenging, but he's a little bit too reckless at times, and calm and conservative is what you need in a game against City where you're just going to sit back. So, in terms of discipline, it'd have to be Lindelof. But yeah, I can't lean towards Bailly now. I know I've been advocating for him to play there. It's fine if you're going to play a high line against teams because he's got the pace to get back. But if we're going to play a deeper line against City, it's got to be Lindelof because there's no physical presence for him to come up against. Realistically, is Jesus or Aguero going to bully him? No. So it's going to have to be it's going to have to be Lindelof for me. I can't realistically see him starting Bailly. There's just not enough trust. If he's not starting in the big games, which he never does, then there's clearly not enough trust from Ole Gunnar Solskjaer there.
Yeah, I'd probably say, given they're both fit, I'd probably say Lindelof. I think against a team like City, you're not looking for aerial dominance, really, are you? You're looking for someone that will read the game and do something to stop City in their tracks in terms of that interplay and that constant, you need someone who's going to know where the ball's going to be, that sort of thing. So I think that's why Lindelof's probably, in my personal opinion, my favourite option. Ryan, have we got you back, or is it still a bit iffy?
Oh no, I'm here. I'm sorry about that.
There we go.
It's all right.
Well,
that's fine.
Yeah, although I don't feel too skeptical of playing Bailly in this sort of game. I can understand that Lindelof is seen as the better reader of the game. And I think he's quite good in the box in terms of closing shots down and clearing the ball out of play. Again, he's not as aerially dominant as either Maguire or Bailly, but if Lindelof is fully fit, I probably would pick Lindelof. He's the more regular starter, and I do. If I was to put my bias in for the moment, I do prefer Lindelof, but yeah, I wouldn't be too against Bailly playing. No. So yeah, so for me, it's a flip of a coin, basically, for this
Better
game.
to be safe than sorry, right? Especially against City. Better to be safe than sorry, especially against City. That would tear you to shreds if you make a mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, fair enough. I mean, I know you've got to run off very, very shortly, Ryan, so I'll leave the floor open in case either of you want to make any sort of closing statements on the game ahead.
James, predictions. Ryan, predictions. What are you guys saying for this? I'm not going to predict because my predictions are predominantly wrong.
You're a coward.
Yeah, I am a bit of a coward. Predictions. It's like the fear of betting on your own team, isn't it? You never do it because if you bet them to win, they'll inevitably lose. So, James, what are your predictions for this game?
You've got to stay positive when you're predicting, aren't you? So I'll say we'll nick a 1-0 win, but it's very, very bleak in my mind. I won't lie to you. So 1-0 win. Bruno Fernandes penalty.
We'll bring the neutral guy in now in terms of no bias. Ryan, what are you saying for this game?
I feel 2-1 win to City. I see. Yeah, I'd like to eat my own words. I don't see a thrashing, but I see City. I see City winning. 2-1 City.
Fair enough.
Yeah, can't complain.
Well, on that note, we'll call it a day then. Henry, as ever, massive thanks for joining me, and Ryan again. We're looking forward already to having you on next month. You've been brilliant again. So if you haven't already, be sure to check out @Tactics on not Facebook, Twitter. It's a brilliant account. He's putting up a lot of good articles at the minute. I'd recommend the one where he identifies different players' dribbling styles. It's a very, very interesting read. But yeah, Ryan, brilliant to have you on.
Thanks very much, James and Henry. I've really enjoyed this again. Sorry about that connection issue.
That's all right.
But hopefully a win this weekend for United, and kick on from that. But we'll have to wait and see, obviously.
Definitely. Well, if you did enjoy the video, be sure to like and subscribe. We should be up with a new episode next week. All over the place here. And let's look forward to us clinging on to a 0-0 at the weekend. So we'll see you next time.
Manchester United are the champions of Europe again.